firstly, I want to talk about what was announced last night. This mandatory isolation law that was announced last night. The order from government. People travelling to Ireland through airports or ports, you will have to sign a form to let the authorities know where you will be isolating for 14 days or else. And we'll tease out the details. But I'm joined by Anne Rabbitte of Fianna Fáil for Galway East, TD for Galway East and spokesperson for Children and Youth Affairs. In Donegal is Pearse Doherty, Sinn Féin spokesperson on finance and TD for Doonanall. Emer Higgins is a Fine Gael TD for Dublin Midwest and joins me in studio in Dublin, as does Eoghan Corry, a travel journalist and member of the Tourism Recovery Task Force. And we're joined by Tony Foley, Emeritus Associate Professor of Economics at DCU Business School. We'll also be joined by Professor Frank Sullivan, a consultant radiation oncologist at the Galway Clinic, a little bit later on, as well as Brian Ledden, Green Party TD. But you are the government representative here, Emer Higgins. Talk to me about this mandatory isolation. An awful lot of people are wondering how it will work in detail and how it will be policed. So I arrive at Dublin Airport next Thursday. What happens?
So you arrive into Dublin Airport on Thursday, you're asked to complete a form. That's actually the situation at the moment. But what we were finding was not everybody was complying with the ask of completing a form.
So you won't be let out into Ireland until you sign the form now?
Yes, it's now mandatory to form it, so it's to fill it out. So it's now a legal offence if you don't complete it, or it's a legal offence if you give false or misleading information in it.
So you'll have more Gardaí or officials at the airports and ports, so will you?
So it's going to be policed by the border management. So they get the forms afterwards, and it's up to them. Then they're going to be making phone calls, doing spot checks to make sure that people are where they say they are.
So they'll be managing the borders and the ports and airports, and making thousands of phone calls a week as well.
Yeah, so I suppose it's a big ask, and I suppose no more than contact tracing. When that was first brought into Ireland, we were wondering how it would happen. But if resources have to be found to make that happen, they will be.
And no extra resources for them then?
So not at the moment, no.
Okay. But will they be? I know it's a funny question, but will they have to show that they filled in the form before they're let through the airport?
It's my understanding that they do, yes.
What about non-compliance? What if people don't comply?
Yes, it's a legal offence to not comply. So there are fines, and the ultimate price is imprisonment for up to 6 months for people who aren't.
How will you find out though?
Well, I suppose if somebody's refusing to fill out the form then and there, it's going to be pretty easy to detect that they're not complying.
What if I sign the form and I say, Emer, I'm going to HEadhra in Connemara and I'll be there self-isolating for 14 days.
Yeah.
How are you going to find out if I'm gone to Galway City or not?
Yeah, you're also given your contact details. So it's important that people are available to do those follow-up calls. I mean, we were in a situation last week and the week before where people were able to arrive in Dublin Airport, waltz through the airport, decide they didn't want to complete the form, and I don't think that's right. So what we've now done is
based on trust now?
Well, no, what we're now doing is making it a legal obligation for them to do that. The Minister has said that and Dr. Tony Holohan has also said that it's still under review. If we feel that we need to make this stricter and more stringent, that's something that we will most certainly consider.
How long will it be in place? It's starting next Thursday, isn't it?
It is indeed, yeah.
Until?
So it's going to be in place until I think the 8th of June, and at that point then it will be reviewed. So it's like our roadmap, everything's going to be reviewed, things will be extended, things may be strictened, things may be loosened, and that will all be dependent on public health advice.
It'll probably be rolled on. I think the 18th of June is the date, yeah. One more question before I open this up. What about people returning from Irish people? For example, a teacher in Dubai returning for the summer holidays, and Dubai is a really hot place now, but what if they return to the airport and they have to self-isolate, but they have nowhere but the family home? Yeah,
so I suppose that's what we need to look at as well in terms of if we were to strengthen this. So we have a self-isolation centre at the moment in City West in my own constituency, and we do need to examine whether or not our self-isolation centres are going to be enough, whether people are going to be able to self-isolate in their own homes, and that's why I suppose the Minister has said he will come back with more proposals around this if we feel it's an issue.
Is it likely then that the whole family would have to self-isolate?
No, I don't think so. I think that's what we'd like to avoid. I mean, we're now in the business of, with the roadmap, trying to get Ireland step by step back towards normality. So that's what we will be trying to avoid.
Is this workable in your opinion? You've gone through airports and ports, and there are mechanisms and measures for SARS and other viruses right throughout the world where you've been known. Is this workable in your opinion?
It's a sideshow, but it's workable. I was caught in the H1N1 outbreak in Mexico in 2009. I've been through Asia during SARS. People on aircraft, and the way it will work is the form will be filled out on the aircraft. It's quite normal, beyond the European Union to have lots of forms to fill out, to have proof of visa. You've got people questioning you, yellow fever, crossing borders in Africa. It's not that big a deal. The thing is that it's a bit of a sideshow at this stage.
What do you mean?
Quarantine was introduced. It was sort of an Asian idea, and what I see happened is that politically across Europe, people started thinking about it pretty late in the day. The Italians introduced it. The Spanish only introduced it. We have a very high infection rate. Only introduced it Friday of last week. Obviously, the British are going through all this scenario about bringing it in June. I'm not sure what it's doing in our statute books, or why we are suddenly jumping on something, considering the average usage of the airport is 530 people a day leaving and arriving. The way Irish immigration has worked since the start of this is pragmatism rules. People have...
But Emer admits that pragmatism up until now wasn't working. People weren't complying. And people are exercised by it, Eoghan. I want to go to Pierce Doherty, but answer this one before I do, Emer Higgins. People are saying, what about if you live in Northern Ireland or in the north? Can you cross over to Donegal, for example?
Yeah, so where we are as well with that is the United Kingdom are making rules in relation to self-isolation there too. So it's really important that we have good alignment with Northern Ireland. And I know our Chief Medical Officer and the Chief Medical Officer in Northern Ireland are in continual contact on this. I'd like to see their collaborations expanded so as that we have full clarity on issues like that.
A person is saying, Con Foley is saying, can you travel from mainland Britain to the north of Ireland and travel to the south without checks?
You can, because we don't have a hard border between north and south, and I don't think anybody wants to get into a situation where we do.
But what if you arrive in from the UK to the north?
Yes, yeah.
To Dublin Airport, for example. Will you have to self-isolate for 14 days then?
Yes, that is the plan, absolutely.
So you can't, is it?
Yeah, so what we have to do, I suppose, we have to look at travel by its very nature is international. And what's within our controls is how we can control our own borders. So our ports and our airports, in terms of what's in the Republic, it's up to us to control how we manage those. And that's what we are doing. In terms of Northern Ireland, we don't have jurisdiction over people arriving in Belfast Airport. And the majority of whom, I suppose, at the moment, air traffic control passenger numbers are at a trickle. So I don't know that it's a massive issue for us. But it is something, of course, that we'll have to monitor.
Pierce Doherty, what do you make of this?
Look, I think the government have been behind the curve in relation to this issue in terms of our ports and airports. I think it's about 5-6 weeks since I raised this issue with the Taoiseach, and look, what we've got is this kind of not mandatory up until now filling out of a form, while other jurisdictions are probably moving away before us. The reality is, Cormac, this is going to be rely on the goodwill of passengers, because
it'll be policed, says Emer.
Well, look, this is what isn't clear. Look, depending on how many passengers come in, is the resources available? Have the resources been put in place in relation to policing? Is it a phone call? Are people going to be knocking on doors? And that's not clear. What we would be eager to see in Sinn Féin is to look at other proposals that have been made also to strengthen our the safety in terms of our airports and ports and those travelling in which may have COVID. And that's the type of proposals that were put forward by the International Air Transport Association and the Airports Council International. And they talked about, for example, temperature screening. It's already been carried out in a number of countries. It's not happening here for those leaving or coming into the country. It won't catch everybody, we understand that, but it can play a big part in terms of trying to identify those.
Wasn't that considered and dismissed by the Chief Medical Officer? He says you could take some medication and you wouldn't have a temperature and you'd be missed.
Yeah, and that's the point. We accept that it won't capture everybody, but it will capture some, and it will capture indeed some who may not know, that they have COVID-19, that they're asymptomatic, and that they're planning to travel. And if they knew that they had a temperature or that they had symptoms, they wouldn't even dare enter into a flight with other passengers and potentially infect them. So these type of measures can be assisted. We have other airlines are now introducing their own requirements on wearing of face coverings on flights. We believe that that now needs to be introduced for those flying into and out of Ireland. These are things that can protect themselves, protect each other's in relation to this, and it's probably could be more beneficial than the type of mandatory documentation. Although we're not opposed to that. The question is the resources going to flow? Let
me bring in Anne Rabbitte. Do you have doubts or worries about resources, because no extra resources to police or manage this as of now, says Emer Higgins?
Of course I have loads of concerns and reservations on what was announced yesterday on it with the lack of extra resources. I do think that making it mandatory and not having the resources to possibly follow it up isn't the best way to go. I do think also, while there's only a trickle coming through, telling people that they're going to have to end up in isolation for 14 days doesn't help our tourism trade, if there's any tourism trade coming in whatsoever. I think we should be looking at the temperature testing and the temperature and also the testing of people that are coming across, along with filling in the forms and actually the follow up on it. Like, it's unfortunate that the app isn't available, but if the app was available, people would have to be mandatory. It would have to be 80% of them would have to have signed up to it. So the app isn't a solution, whereas I do think temperature testing and proper testing as people come in with filling in the forms. And if you're
worried about tourism, this could go beyond the 18th of June, and this could. I mean, a lot of people who are working in B&Bs or hotels or anywhere in the tourism sector, they're looking towards the end of the summer. That's their window now to make a book, isn't that right? If this is rolled on beyond the 18th of June, Anne Rabbitte, would you worry for them?
Of course I do, absolutely, because to be honest with you, anybody that's coming is coming for a 2-week break. So what we're saying is, come here all right, but go into your B&B and stay there for 14 days in quarantine, and when you're finished, then would you mind getting into your taxi or car and going back to Dublin and leaving the country? Whereas I'm coming the suggestion that I think we should explore all options, and I talk again about the temperature test, which is an immediate one, and I hear what the CMO says about that, but there's nothing to prevent us from relocating one of our testing centres right up to Dublin Airport or out to Dublin Port or to Cork or to Shannon and actually have a follow-up and still fill out the forms on the flights.
So you're basically saying, Emer Higgins, she's saying that this is going to decimate any tourism from overseas.
We're in a situation right now where we don't want tourists arriving in Ireland at the moment. Obviously, we're on a roadmap to reopening Ireland, and the different easings of restrictions will mean that we're looking at things in a different way as the situation evolves. Right now, I think it's in the interests of Ireland that tourists aren't coming here. Right now, I mean, the hotels are closed, the beaches, the pubs are closed. You know, we don't want to be encouraging people here. What we want to do,
one voice. Let her finish the point. Yeah.
What we do want to do is protect people, and we're in a situation now where, thankfully, we're making really good inroads when it comes to fighting this virus. And what we don't want are people arriving into the country and jeopardising the progress that the Irish people have made.
Let your putative partner in government back in, Anne Rabbitte.
Thank you, Cormac. What I was about to say there was, what about all the Irish who have English families abroad that want to come home to visit? That is what they have done year after year after year. They're going to come regardless, Emer. They're going to come home to visit. So aren't we better off to have the proper measures in place to ensure that when they come, that as opposed to just doing isolation and they're going visiting from family to family, that they're not breaking the law, that we actually have testings and measures put in place to ensure that we protect everybody in society?
Absolutely, Anne, but I don't think we're at that point now. People are still working from home. Normal life hasn't resumed in Ireland yet. As we reopen Ireland, absolutely, you're right, we're going to have to start looking at those measures. But right now, it's about containing the virus, and the best way to do that is by following the roadmap and by following the advice from the experts.
And the quarantine measure announced, let me address this to Eoghan Corry. The quarantine measure that was announced last night is far more stringent. It comes with a fine of €2,500 or 6 months in prison if you don't comply with it. We've got a figure from the Department of Justice. It relates to the period of the 28th of April to the 18th of May in Dublin Airport. They say for everyone expected to fill out the form, the passenger locator form, there was a compliance rate of just under 70%. So 30% of people didn't comply. Was there a need, in your opinion, to bolster, strengthen the law to such a degree?
No, because the number of people involved is so small. What we had was probably a checking level wasn't, dealing third-hand experience here, that the checking level of the forms when they arrived wasn't very high. don't think it was taken that seriously. Most of the people who are coming through are not tourists. There are no tourists in the country. There is an exemption for people, by the way. If you say you're going to Belfast, you're not going to be handing over the form. What we have is people reacting to photographs on social media, the Keelings case, all of that, where resources which are better deployed elsewhere are now being talked about, moved to an airport. The airports have not been where infections have come from. Across Europe, there isn't a quarantine in most of the European countries for people within the European Union. The ones that have brought it in are talking about Spain, for instance, and we're talking about removing it on June the 7th. Parts of Europe are talking about reopening. There's a European Commission plan, 500 pages.
Yeah, but we're balancing public health here
and now we're going against it.
You're on the task force. But you're on the tourism recovery task force. So there's a balance here between protecting the public and public health and allowing sectors like tourism to recover. What about Anne Rabbitt's point that you're basically, with this quarantine, telling people, come to Ireland, isolate for 14 days and get a taxi back then?
It's really important that the isolation, the quarantine be removed early, and early in the booking cycle. When it comes up for review on June the 18th, hopefully they'll look at it and they say this isn't really serving any purpose, and it's a waste of resources that could be put into real public health fight issues. What we need to, there isn't going to be any tourism until probably late August at the best. A lot of the industry is writing off the whole of the season, but in the booking cycle, we do not want the message going out that alone of the 27 countries, Britain is doing their own thing, but the only European country that is putting quarantine on fellow European citizens is Ireland. What sort of a message is that to send out to the rest of Europe?
Emer, what is that message?
The message is that we need to protect our citizens. As I said, we're early enough in this at the moment. We're 4 or 5 days into the easing of our first set of restrictions. It's a really, really rapidly evolving situation. I mean, we're in the middle of a global pandemic. When you put it into context, it's hard to know exactly when restrictions can be lifted.
Texter says, why weren't these travel restrictions put into place 3 months ago?
So they weren't necessarily needed. I mean, passengers have been at a trickle for the last number of months. We've had healthcare assistants coming back to help in Ireland who have been self-isolating. We've had people working in cargo coming in. Now we're looking at a situation where Ryanair are planning to open 9 of its 10 routes. We're looking at a situation where passenger numbers are likely to rise. That's why we're now making the decision that we need to bring in these rules.
Cormac, I think we need a common sense approach here on this. And while passenger numbers are a trickle, is that not the best time to put best practices in place? And best practices, yes, are filling out the forms. Best practice would be to do the testing. Yes, practices would be to do the screening and the follow-up, and to see if we can do that. And if that fails, then resort back to what the quarantine and the isolation. But at least give it a chance to work. We've gone to the extreme.
I want to go to Pierce Doherty, because it seems that the government, based on what you have said, Emer Higgins, has made this decision now based on possibly Ryanair or other companies, airlines, opening up flights again in the near future. But cafes and restaurants will open soon. Now, it seems to me that Sinn Féin is pushing very hard this morning through Louise O'Reilly and other spokespersons, Pierce Doherty, to align our social distancing rules to the WHO guidelines. So here, and it's been reiterated this morning by the Taoiseach, he says the social distancing rule here is 2 metres. WHO say 1 metre. Are you in Sinn Féin pushing for 1 metre?
No, we're not. What we're saying is that there shouldn't be kite flying by the government. What we need throughout this pandemic is we need very simple, clear messaging. And I think just like the return to education and what happened earlier this week with kites flying from the Minister of Education that some schools would go back earlier, that we now have coming out of Cabinet suggestions that they are going to look to see whether the 2 metre rule will be changed for the 1 metre rule. What we need is consistency. What we need is consistency with public health advice, and we need now the government probably to explain to the public why the WHO recommends 1 metre and why the government believes and NEFID believes and the public health advice believes that it is 2 metres.
It seems to me that you are pushing for more alignment with the WHO. The Sinn Féin statement from Louise O'Reilly says the 1 metre social distance rule should be introduced immediately if it's in line with public health advice.
Absolutely, if it's in line with public health advice. That's the key point. And the issue here is that Cabinet members started to discuss this yesterday, have floated a kite in relation to changing from 2 metres to 1 metre. What we need in this case, in terms of social distancing rule, is it needs to be public health advice. So that is why there is now a responsibility on government to explain to the public what is the public health advice and why 2 metres, if that is the public health advice, if that's the current advice that has been accepted, then why that has been the case. Because you have WHO advice, but you also have European advice, which is counter to the WHO. So there's no need for clarity in relation to this.
Let me ask the government representative here, Emer Higgins of Fine Gael, what is the rationale? If the WHO and the ECDC are saying 1 metre, why do we have 2?
So Pearse is asking for clarity and consistency, and I don't think there could be anything clearer or more consistent than the Taoiseach today, who said 2 metres is here to stay. That's been the guidance from the get-go from this.
Absolutely clear cut. Absolutely clear. But why is it different to the 1 metre rule proposed by the WHO?
Yeah, so different countries are adapting different rules. The WHO is advising 1 metre. Ireland, as you know, is advising 2 metres. ECDC 2 metres. The United States of America are advising 6 feet, which is about 1.8 metres. There are some studies that show you can catch it at 8 metres. So there isn't consistency on this.
But the reason I'm pushing this...
But that's why it's so important that we take the best possible medical advice available. And for us in Ireland, that's the medical advice of NEFIT.
But what is the rationale behind it? The reason I'm pushing it is that business people who run cafes and restaurants tell me I would be much more viable at 1 metre as opposed to 2.
I can appreciate that. Life would be an awful lot easier for everybody if it was at 1 metre as opposed to 2. I get that, and I get it's really difficult. And we saw on the Claire Byrne show during the week the simulation of what a pub would look like, and it would be much different if it was 1 metre as opposed to 2 metres. I do get that. We're not in the business of not wanting people to have fun or not wanting the pubs to open because we don't want people to have crack. We want to do what's the best thing to do from a public health perspective. And the Chief Medical Officer and the team at NEFIT are giving us this advice, and that's the advice we have to take.
Yeah, it's a big one, Owen, isn't it, for anybody involved in tourism, cafes, restaurants, the hospitality industry, hotels. This is a key decision, this social distancing rule, isn't it?
I don't think social distancing is really going to enter it. If the health authorities say 2 metres, nobody in tourism is going to say, 1.5 will do. They're looking at the implications for their business, but they're not questioning the rationale for the decision. Where they're coming from is what is going to be retrieved from this, how long it's going to be in place, and what measures do we have to make sure that we have an exit strategy from lockdown, because these things are more easily put in place than taken out of place. What we didn't want is each of the EU member states having a different exit strategy from their different lockdowns. That because part of the problem is when coronavirus arrived, all the member states ran their own way. The EU Commission has a tourism plan, and already some of the member states are saying, okay, we're going to take bits of this and we're going to put our own strategy in place. We need a lot of clarity. Tourism in international business. We want to be able to tell international tourists and indeed domestic tourists what they can expect
and they expect in
when they come to Ireland.
If I'm lucky enough to book a hotel in August at some point, if that's allowed, what's it going to be like? Will it be without a bar, without a spa? What will the experience be like?
August we should be through the phases of the opening, but uncertainty haunts every step of this. Necessarily so. Decisions will be made on what developments happen and new cases. But what the tourism sector is facing is a wipeout. There are no tourists in Ireland. There's no prospects of tourists in Ireland. People's mortgages have to be paid. It's 10% of our economy, as most people know, and it's a very important 10% because it's in the rural, the bits that the other parts of the economy don't get. They need not just the strategy and the ideas which the leadership task force hopefully will be coming up with, but they also need a little bit of certainty provided on what supports are in place for them and where they have to turn when the cash runs out. Some of our hotel people are looking at having no cash until March 2021. When that starts, and it's hitting them at a time when cash reserves are traditionally low, entering the summer season.
So what kind of supports are you talking about? And you're on the task force. You and others on that task force will have to come up with ideas. Are you talking about reduced VAT rates or doing away with rates altogether? Employee incentive schemes? What will help them to keep going in the interim?
anything that gets the little bit of cash that they have, keep it in place. Anything that encourages what is diminished international tourism is out there to come to Ireland. Anything that gets a little bit of an increase of a market share from a smaller market. All the things that we need, including this message about air access, this as I call the quarantine measures a sideshow, because they seem to be out of sync with what's happening internationally, certainly within Europe, that we are catching up so much of our energy and our time and our resources on a 14-day mandatory quarantine for people coming into the country. To get people on those aircraft, they're going to have to be tested. The airlines are going to have very high standards. The airports are going to have high standards. Is that where our resources, our discussion should be directed, as it is being this morning? Let's look at what's happening in August. Hopefully quarantine will mandatory 14-day quarantine will be gone. And then we have to look at the bits of tourism that are left and try and rebuild them.
Before I finish with this part of the discussion, you were telling me that Ireland has an opportunity here to rebrand itself altogether. What do you mean?
Okay, it's a terrible situation. We're going to be rebuilding our tourism, but let's look at what's happening internationally, because internationally tourism is really shattered. Is it going to be a time for long queues for Pirates of the Caribbean or 5,400 cabin cruise ships? Or is it going to be a time for celebrating the open air? I don't think 2 metre social distancing counts on a mountain in Kerry when the wind is blowing at the level that it does. You're not going to... so we can actually deliver, if we keep our health record clean, and that's why the health safe, that's a matter for the health experts. But from the tourism side, if we have a product that we can deliver back to the international marketplace that sets Ireland aside from its competitors and from other locations as a place which is green and safe and safer, because the consumer, the people who decide on Irish tourism are not going to be the hoteliers, the publicans, or even the politicians, or even the airline people. It's going to be the consumer. If we get international consumers convinced that Ireland has something to offer in the post-COVID world, that's one of the jobs the task force will be
so there's
facing.
an opportunity there. Okay, we'll leave it at that. Eoghan Corry, travel journalist and member of the Tourism Recovery Task Force. Thank you
Cormac.
very much indeed.